How can the sunniest nation in Africa still live in darkness? The shocking truth? Paris and Washington kept Burkina Faso dependent on foreign diesel for decades. But now, Traoré is breaking the chains. For the first time, giant solar fields are rising from the Sahel sands. Not charity, not loans, pure African power. This is the hidden revolution the West never wanted you to know. Ibrahim Traoré turning the sun into freedom. On the 9th of February 2024, the Council of Ministers, chaired by President Ibrahim Traoré, approved the construction of a 25-megawatt solar power plant at Donson Airport, financed through a €45.7 million concessional loan from the Export-Import Bank of China. This facility, complete with a 5-megawatt, 20-megawatt-hour battery storage system, aims to boost Burkina Faso's energy capacity while reducing costly electricity imports. But that is only the first spark in what could become a blazing national transformation. The night before the announcement, Ouagadougou felt different. Generators rattled, streetlights flickered, and in the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré sat in silence. A single lamp lit his desk, where maps of Burkina Faso were spread out, each district marked with red circles. Places where children still studied by kerosene, where mothers cooked in darkness, where hospitals cut surgeries short when the fuel ran out. He tapped the papers slowly, then looked to the horizon. The city was asleep, but the stars were not. Above them all, the sun waited, promising more than any bank or diplomat had ever offered. His advisors had told him, "Wait, Mr. President, negotiate, take another loan, depend on aid." But Traoré refused. "We cannot eat promises, we cannot breathe debt. We will take the light that is already ours." The next morning, before a crowd of farmers, students, and soldiers, he declared a new path. Burkina Faso would no longer rent its future. The solar fields would rise not just as panels of steel and glass, but as banners of independence. In Kaya, villagers gathered to watch engineers stake the first frames into the soil. The ground cracked as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Women carried baskets of water to cool the workers. Children climbed fences to see the shining plates being tilted toward the heavens. And whispers spread, "This is not just electricity, this is freedom." Foreign journalists scoffed. Western investors warned of unsustainable risk. But the people didn't listen. For the first time, the rhythm of work in the villages aligned with the rhythm of the sun. One farmer told his son, "When these panels rise, you will never fear the dark again. Remember this day." The skeptics were many. Foreign analysts in Paris and Brussels called the project symbolic theater. They said Burkina Faso was too poor, too unstable, too dependent to control its own destiny. But inside the country, something deeper was happening, something no spreadsheet could measure. In the dusty town of Koudougou, an old teacher named Adama gathered his students under a mango tree. Holding up a newspaper with Traoré's picture, he told them, "Do you see this man? He is telling us that the sun above us belongs to us. Not to France, not to the IMF, not to anyone but our people. Remember this." The students listened, wide-eyed, as if they were being handed not just knowledge, but permission to dream. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, soldiers patrolled near the construction site. Some of them had fought in the Sahel against terrorists, armed with weapons smuggled from Libya and Mali. Now they stood guard, not for war, but for light. One sergeant whispered, This is why we fight. So our children will see lamps glowing in their homes, not fires in the fields." But the pressure was mounting. Western advisors warned Traoré that moving too fast could trigger sanctions. Certain development partners quietly hinted at cutting off aid. A letter arrived from a European envoy. Burkina Faso must consult with international institutions before undertaking projects of this scale. Traoré read the letter aloud in a cabinet meeting. Then, with deliberate calm, he tore it in half. His words were few. "We did not consult when the sun rose this morning. We will not consult to use it." That gesture spread through villages like wildfire. In markets, women repeated his words as they sold their millet and groundnuts. In schools, teachers wrote them on chalkboards. At night, when the construction lights lit up the fields of solar panels, crowds gathered as if it were a festival. Children danced in the glow. Elders prayed. The land itself seemed to hum with a new kind of hope. The skeptics still doubted. But in Burkina Faso, something irreversible had begun. The resistance came quietly at first. A headline in a European paper sneered, "Burkina Faso's solar dream will end in darkness." Think tanks issued reports warning of financial irresponsibility. But beneath the polished words lay an unmistakable message: stay dependent. Stay where you belong. Traoré read them all. He did not reply. Instead, he visited a village outside Tenkodogo where the first microgrid had been switched on. There, under the shade of neem trees, children laughed as they charged phones for the first time. A midwife showed him a small refrigerator humming steadily, keeping vaccines cold without fear of blackouts. The chief of the village, his face carved with decades of hardship, placed his hand on the president's shoulder. "For us, this light is not technology, it is life." The president nodded, his voice low, "And life should never be borrowed." But the reaction abroad grew sharper. A Western energy consultant warned on television, "This government is chasing illusions. Burkina Faso cannot manage such projects without foreign oversight. These panels will rot in the sun." Yet even as they spoke, the panels kept rising hundreds, then thousands, across fields where millet once struggled to grow. Meanwhile, in Bobo Dioulasso, young engineers trained by local universities worked day and night. Many had once dreamed of leaving for Europe. Now they carried laptops through the dust, monitoring solar inverters, testing batteries, fixing circuits. One of them told a reporter, "We used to think freedom meant leaving. Now we see freedom is staying and building." The symbolism was not lost. Every panel raised was a declaration that Burkina Faso would not be chained to diesel imports, nor to the political strings attached to aid. Traoré knew the stakes. He told his ministers, "If we fail, they will laugh. If we succeed, they will fear. And if they fear, then Africa will rise." The silence after his words was heavy, but it carried a spark. For in that moment, they all understood. This was bigger than electricity. It was sovereignty, crystallized in steel and sunlight. Night fell over Ouagadougou, but the city did not fall into darkness. In a district once plagued by constant blackouts, lights stayed on. Families gathered around televisions. Children read books long after sunset. Small shops, usually shuttered by dusk, remained open, selling bread, tea, and hope. The people called it Traoré's light. But as the glow spread, so did the storm. Foreign embassies whispered of destabilization. Energy corporations, long profiting from diesel and imported grids, lobbied their governments to intervene. Quiet threats emerged: suspension of trade agreements, withdrawal of funding, even covert operations to monitor the project. One evening, an aide rushed into the palace with urgent news. "Mr. President, there are reports of sabotage at the eastern solar site. Panels destroyed, wires cut." Traoré stood slowly, fists clenched. His response was calm but iron. "They believe we are weak. They are wrong. Replace every broken panel and build 10 more." Within hours, soldiers and volunteers rushed to the site. By dawn, not only were the panels restored, but new rows were already being planted like seeds in the soil. The message was unmistakable. For every act of sabotage, Burkina Faso would rise higher. Meanwhile, in the villages, elders spoke with reverence. "This is not merely electricity. This is the battle for our dignity." And abroad, a shift was beginning. Across Africa, young leaders watched closely. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, whispers of a new alliance spread. An energy corridor uniting sovereign nations, free from Western dictates. Journalists began to ask uneasy questions. is Ibrahim Traoré rewriting the map of Africa's future? Back in Ouagadougou, a journalist asked Traoré during a press conference, "Mr. President, are you not afraid of international isolation?" His reply was firm, almost prophetic. "Isolation from dependency is not a punishment. It is liberation. We may walk alone for a time, but we will walk free." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked, but no one dared to challenge him further. And in that silence, a truth became clear. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just leading a project. He was leading a revolution. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance. Burkina Faso's solar revolution was no longer a quiet project. It had become a battlefield of narratives. On international television, commentators mocked Traoré as a naive soldier playing at economics. Western newspapers ran caricatures portraying him as reckless, a populist leading his nation into energy chaos. Ouvrably, but inside the country, another story was being written. In the Sahel town of Dori, women once walked miles each day to fetch water. Now, with solar-powered pumps, wells flowed steadily. A grandmother lifted her bucket with tears in her eyes and said to her granddaughter, "You will not grow up thirsty as we did. This light has quenched more than darkness, it has quenched despair." In hospitals, doctors could finally rely on consistent electricity. Surgeries were performed at night. Incubators stayed warm. A young nurse whispered, "We are no longer choosing between saving lives and saving fuel." For the people, this was not policy, it was salvation. And yet, Traoré knew victories at home would provoke enemies abroad. Reports reached him that powerful energy lobbies in Europe were pressuring the African Union to intervene diplomatically. Anonymous letters warned him to halt expansion or face unforeseen consequences. One night, as he sat with his generals, he spoke with quiet certainty. "They think this is only about power, but it is about freedom, and freedom does not negotiate." His words were carried into the streets. Young men painted murals of solar panels rising like shields. Women sang in markets, "The sun is ours." But the president was not content with symbolism alone. He unveiled an even bolder vision, an interconnected grid across Burkina Faso's regions, powered entirely by renewable energy. No village left behind, no home forgotten. His ministers stared in shock. The cost, the risk, the defiance, it was monumental. But Traoré simply said, "If we dream small, we remain small. If we dream as wide as the sun, we rise." And so, the work began. The expansion moved faster than anyone expected. Across Burkina Faso, construction sites blazed with activity. In Fada Ngorma, villagers stood shoulder to shoulder with engineers, laying out rows of panels that shimmered like mirrors to the sky. In Banfora, students studying electrical engineering found themselves thrust into history, designing control systems that would carry their nation into a new age. But this speed unsettled the world. A leaked memo from a European energy consortium declared, "If Burkina Faso succeeds, our influence in West Africa will collapse." Another report warned, "The precedent of self-sufficient energy threatens our strategic partnerships." The message was clear. Traoré's solar revolution was not just about electricity, it was about breaking the chains of dependency that had bound Africa for generations. Tensions escalated. In Ouagadougou, rumors spread of foreign operatives attempting to bribe local officials to slow the projects. Others whispered of plots far darker. Yet, for every obstacle, the people rallied harder. Volunteers poured in. Farmers offered their land. Elders blessed the work with prayers. One evening, Traoré visited a nearly completed site outside Ouagadougou. The fields stretched endlessly, each panel angled toward the dying sun. As dusk fell, the first surge of electricity pulsed through the grid, lighting up entire neighborhoods at once. Gasps rose from the crowd, followed by cheers that echoed into the night sky. A boy climbed onto his father's shoulders and shouted, "Look, we have caught the sun." Traoré smiled faintly, but his expression carried more weight than joy. He knew this moment would shake capitals across the world. Burkina Faso was proving that sovereignty was not an abstract slogan. It was something you could see, touch, and live beneath. Later, in a private council, his advisors pressed him. "Mr. President, are we prepared for what comes next? They will not let us walk this path without consequence." He paused, then replied with steel in his voice, "We are not asking permission to exist. We are proving that existence itself is power. And once our people taste freedom, no one on this earth can take it back." The room fell silent. They knew the fight had only begun. The turning point came suddenly. What began as whispers of resistance soon erupted into open confrontation. One morning, news broke. A coalition of international creditors announced new restrictions, cutting funding to Burkina Faso's regional banks. Foreign media framed it as necessary safeguards. But inside the palace, Traoré read the headlines with fire in his eyes. He understood the truth. This was economic warfare, designed to suffocate his solar revolution before it could fully bloom. Advisors urged caution. "Mr. President, perhaps we must slow the rollout, renegotiate terms, seek compromise." But Traoré shook his head. "Compromise is a leash. If we accept their conditions, the sun itself will be foreign-owned." Then, something unexpected happened. Across the Sahel, messages poured in. Mali offered technicians, Niger pledged raw materials, Guinea announced joint research teams. What was meant to isolate Burkina Faso instead triggered a wave of solidarity. An unspoken alliance was forming a coalition of sovereign nations, bound not by treaties written in European boardrooms, but by the shared determination to own their future. For the first time in decades, the balance of power in West Africa was shifting. And at its center stood Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier-turned-president who dared to transform sunlight into sovereignty. The world was watching, some in fear, others in awe. The coalition grew louder with every passing week. At first, Western media dismissed it as a fragile experiment. But when lights stayed on in Ouagadougou while parts of Europe faced rolling blackouts, the narrative cracked. Burkina Faso's solar revolution had not collapsed. It was accelerating. International reporters swarmed into the capital. Some came to expose failure, but instead, they found markets buzzing, clinics powered, and classrooms glowing at night. What they witnessed did not fit the script they had been paid to write. And then came the twist no one had predicted. During a summit in Bamako, leaders from Mali, Niger, and Guinea stood beside Ibrahim Traoré and signed a joint declaration. "The Sahel will not be chained to foreign energy. We will light our nations with our own hands." The crowd erupted. Journalists scrambled for explanations. Analysts called it a dangerous precedent. But to millions watching across Africa, it was liberation made visible. For Traoré, it was more than politics. It was vindication. The boy in Dori who had shouted, "We have caught the sun," was no longer speaking for one village. He was speaking for a continent. And the message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso had turned the sun into power not just for itself, but as a beacon for all of Africa. Burkina Faso was reborn. The villages once swallowed by darkness now glowed with steady light. Children studied late into the night. Farmers powered irrigation pumps without fear of fuel shortages. Clinics saved lives without interruption. And above it all, the solar fields stretched like mirrors of freedom, reflecting a future no longer borrowed from anyone. Ibrahim Traoré stood before his people and declared, "We did not ask for permission to be free, we stood up to win it. And now, let the world know Burkina Faso will live by its own sun, its own hands, its own destiny." His words carried beyond Ouagadougou. Across Africa, leaders and citizens alike saw a path that did not bow to foreign dictates. The revolution of light had become a revolution of dignity. And for those watching from afar, Americans, Europeans, anyone who has ever wondered if one small nation can defy giants, The answer was blazing in the Sahel sky. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to the channel to continue the journey of an Africa that no longer bows its head. God bless Africa.